These are 5 true stories of mystery and unanswered questions, from cryptic notes and eerie lead masks to unexplained disappearances and baffling deaths. Even decades later, they keep defying logic, leaving us stunned. Join us as we explore these chilling cases that no experts can solve. On the evening of October 25, 1984, the life of Günther Stoll took a series of unbelievable turns that would lead to one of the most baffling mysteries in modern German history. But was Günther a man haunted by paranoia and cryptic premonitions, or did he know something that made him dangerous? In 1984, Günther Stoll, a 34-year-old unemployed food engineer, lived a modest life in Unshausen, West Germany, with his wife and daughter. Born in a nearby village, the man's life had recently taken a dark, foreboding turn. In simple terms, Günther was behaving weirdly. He often spoke of them, a shadowy group he believed was conspiring against him. While his paranoia caused concern among his loved ones, he never really explained who these people were or why they might wish him harm. That October, his bizarre unease intensified, peaking on the 25th. The day began uneventfully. Günther shared dinner with his wife, but his growing anxiety surfaced once again. He muttered about them, claiming that evil forces were working against him. Just before 11 p.m., he suddenly exclaimed, "Now I've got it!" The man didn't explain this moment of clarity. Instead, he scribbled 6 cryptic characters, Yogzi or possibly Yo6 on a sheet of paper, only to immediately cross them out. Without explaining his actions, Günther left his wife and home, determined to visit his favorite pub, Papillon, in the nearby village of Wilnsdorf. At the pub, Günther ordered a beer, but never touched it. Moments later, he collapsed to the floor, injuring his face. Witnesses noted that he had not consumed alcohol and did not appear intoxicated. Regaining consciousness, he left abruptly, seemingly shaken. What he did over the next 2 hours remains unknown. However, around 1 a.m., Günther appeared at the home of an old acquaintance in his home village. Speaking from her doorstep, he alluded to a horrible incident he believed would occur that very night. His host, unnerved by the late-hour visit, advised him to return home or seek comfort from his parents, who lived nearby. Günther declined, stating they wouldn't understand, and drove off. By 3 a.m. on October 26, 1984, Günther's car, a blue VW Golf, was discovered crashed into a ditch along the A45 motorway near Hagen-Sud, over 100 kilometers from his last known location. 2 truck drivers stopped to investigate. Initially, they spotted an injured man walking outside the vehicle wearing a white jacket. However, when they approached the scene, they found Günther inside the passenger seat of his car, naked, gravely injured, and barely conscious. Before losing consciousness, Günther uttered his final cryptic statement. 4 men had been with him in the car, and they were not his friends. Günther died en route to the hospital. The subsequent autopsy revealed a disturbing series of events. He had not been injured in the car crash, but had instead been run over by a different vehicle while already naked. His injuries suggested that this had occurred elsewhere, and his body had been placed back into his car and driven to the new location. The keys were found on the rear shelf, and his clothing was either scattered inside the vehicle or missing entirely. The mysterious note Günther had written before his departure, Yogzi, remained a focal point of the investigation. Was it a random scribble, a code, or an identifier? Despite numerous theories, its meaning is still unknown. Some speculated that since Günther was a food technician, he had simply meant to write yogurt. Others suggested it could be an amateur radio call sign or a reference to a license plate. Theories surrounding Günther's death were equally varied. Some suggested he was the victim of foul play, potentially related to his paranoia about them. Others proposed he suffered a psychological breakdown, his erratic behavior culminating in a tragic accident. Another line of inquiry speculated on his possible involvement in illicit activities, such as a drug deal gone wrong, though no evidence substantiated this. Despite appeals for public assistance, the case remains a mystery. Efforts to reopen the investigation in 2016, including DNA testing, yielded no definitive answers. Over the years, Günther Stoll's death has captured the imagination of amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists alike, but the truth remains elusive. In the early morning of July 2, 1951, a landlady's attempt to deliver a telegram led to a discovery that would baffle investigators, scientists, and the public for decades. Behind the door of Mary Reese's apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, lay a scene both horrifying and mystifying, a body reduced to ashes amid an intact room. But how did it happen? Born on March 8, 1884, Mary Hardy Reeser was a 67-year-old widow who had moved to Florida after her husband's death to be closer to her only son and his family. On July 1, 1951, she spent the evening in her small apartment on Cherry Street Northeast, alone after a visit from her son, Dr. Richard Reeser Jr. Before retiring for the night, she reportedly changed into her nightgown, took 2 sleeping pills, and planned to relax that evening. Mary was a big smoker, and she enjoyed smoking cigarettes in her favorite chair. The following morning, Mary's landlady, Pansy Carpenter, approached the apartment to deliver a telegram. She found the metal doorknob unusually hot. It burned to the touch. Worried, Pansy called for help. When authorities arrived and forced the door open, they discovered an unthinkable sight. Mary Reeser was gone. What was left of her was a small pile of ash amidst the remnants of her overstuffed chair. Strange evidence marked the room. The floor was scorched beneath the chair, the ceiling was soot-stained, and the light switches were warped. But the lower walls, furniture, and newspapers nearby were unscathed. The sheets on Mary's bed were also left untouched, still as white as ever. It all defied logic. Among the few physical remains of Mary were her left foot, still in a silk slipper, her backbone, and her skull, which was reportedly shrunken to an unusually small size, no bigger than a cup. These findings immediately drew both shock and skepticism, as the extreme heat required to cremate a body, typically over 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit sustained for hours, would have destroyed the apartment. Authorities were at a loss. St. Petersburg Police Chief J.R. Reichart described it as the most unusual case of his career. Seeking assistance, he wrote to FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and sent evidence samples, including rug fragments, portions of melted chair springs, and traces of soot. The FBI's subsequent investigation ruled out lightning strikes, arson, and chemical accelerants as causes. Their report suggested a phenomenon known as the wick effect, in which a body's fat acts as fuel for a prolonged, localized fire. They theorized that Mary, a smoker, might have fallen asleep and accidentally ignited her flammable nightgown with a cigarette. Sedated by the sleeping pills, she may have succumbed to smoke inhalation before the flames consumed her. While the wick effect offered a plausible explanation, not everyone agreed. Dr. Wilton M. Krogman, a physical anthropologist and consultant on the case, expressed doubts. He noted that, instead of exploding under intense heat as expected, Mary's skull had reportedly shrunk, an observation he deemed scientifically implausible. Krogman also struggled to reconcile the near-total cremation of her body with the limited damage to the apartment. He called the case the most amazing thing he had ever seen and admitted feeling dread. Soon, the public began to theorize about spontaneous human combustion, a phenomenon in which a person supposedly bursts into flames without an external ignition source. Others speculated about supernatural causes, such as a fireball entering an open window. However, no evidence supported these claims, and the FBI dismissed the idea of spontaneous combustion outright. Mary Reeser's death left questions and unresolved debate. More than 70 years later, the circumstances surrounding her death continue to intrigue and fascinate experts and amateurs as well. It was February 1959 when 9 experienced Russian hikers embarked on a treacherous expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. This journey should have ended with stories of triumph over the wilderness. Instead, the expedition ended in tragedy, and a chilling mystery that would haunt investigators, scientists, and adventurers for decades ensued. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The expedition was the idea of Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute. A passionate outdoorsman, Dyatlov meticulously planned a 200-mile trek through the unforgiving terrain of the Ural Mountains, aiming to achieve Grade 3 hiking certification, the highest level in the Soviet Union. The group of 10, mostly university students, included experienced skiers and hikers united by their love of adventure. On January 28, 1959, one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back due to health issues, leaving 9 to continue into the wilderness. Their journey took them into remote and icy landscapes, culminating in the slopes of Kolatsiakl, meaning Dead Mountain. It was the 1st of February when the group set up camp on a windswept slope, deviating slightly from their intended route due to worsening weather conditions. It was this decision that brought on their doom. That night, something drove them to cut their way out of their tent and flee into the freezing, snow-covered wilderness, woefully underdressed for temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius. Rescue efforts began on February 20th after the hikers failed to return as planned. The search team found their tent on February 26th, partially buried in snow, with its fabric slashed from the inside. Belongings, food, and clothing were left as if abandoned in haste. Footprints led away from the tent, descending toward a forested area 1.5 kilometers away. The first two bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishchenko, were discovered beneath a Siberian pine tree at the forest's edge. Barefoot and dressed only in underwear, they had attempted to start a fire. Nearby, branches were broken high up the tree, possibly indicating a desperate climb for visibility or escape. Between the tree and the tent, the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin were found, spread across several hundred meters as though attempting to return to the tent. Slobodin's skull showed a minor crack, though this was not deemed fatal. The remaining four hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, were not found until May, buried beneath 4 meters of snow in a ravine deeper into the forest. Thibault Brignol had suffered a fractured skull. Zolotaryov and Dubinina had crushed chests, their injuries likened to those from a car crash. Dubinina's tongue and eyes were missing, injuries attributed to post-mortem scavenging. All lacked external wounds corresponding to their severe internal trauma, further baffling investigators. A Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers succumbed to a compelling natural force. 6 died of hypothermia, while the traumatic injuries to the other 3 could not be easily explained. Theories ranged from avalanches and katabatic winds to infrasound-induced panic and military experiments. Radioactivity detected on some clothing added to the speculation, though it was later linked to the prior work of one hiker at a nuclear facility. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, favoring natural explanations such as a slab avalanche. A 2021 study supported this theory, suggesting that a small avalanche buried the tent, forcing the group to flee into the deadly cold. The theory explained the tent's damage and the hikers' initial panic, but questions linger. The absence of typical avalanche debris, the hikers' scattered positions, and their severe injuries challenged this conclusion. Other hypotheses persisted. Some proposed military tests involving parachute mines, citing glowing orbs reported in the area. Others suggested psychological effects from extreme weather, while more fringe theories include UFOs and Yetis. However, no evidence definitively supported these scenarios. What we do know is that the Dyatlov expedition suffered a horrifying end. They were alone, scared, and did not have the proper tools to survive. And now, despite decades of investigation and speculation, the exact sequence of events is still unknown. In August 1966, the hills of Vintem Hill in Niterói, Brazil, became the center of a grim and bizarre discovery. 2 men, fully dressed in suits, lay lifeless on the hillside, their faces obscured by lead masks shaped like crude sunglasses. But who were they, and what caused their death? Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana were electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, several hours away from Rio de Janeiro. Both men were skilled in repairing television transmitters and other electronic equipment. They were hard-working, family-oriented men with no history of erratic behavior. On August 17, 1966, they told their families they were traveling to Sao Paulo to purchase a used car and work-related materials. However, their journey took an unexpected turn. Instead of Sao Paulo, the two traveled to Niterói. Arriving at 2:30 p.m., they were seen visiting local shops where they purchased waterproof coats and a bottle of mineral water. Witnesses at the bar described Miguel as visibly anxious, frequently checking his wristwatch. Their behavior suggested anticipation or apprehension about an impending event. From there, they traveled to the slopes of Vintem Hill, either by jeep or on foot, with their final resting place being an isolated and lonely area. Their bodies were discovered 3 days later on August 20th by Jorge da Costa Alves, a young boy flying a kite. The sight was peculiar. Manuel and Miguel lay side by side, their bodies partly concealed by grass, with lead masks covering their faces. Beside them were a bottle of mineral water, 2 wet towels, and a notebook containing cryptic instructions. 16:30 be at the specified location. 18:30 ingest capsules. After the effect protect metals await signal mask. There were no signs of struggle, trauma, or violence. The men appeared to have died peacefully, yet the absence of any visible cause of death puzzled investigators. The lead masks, crafted manually, added an inexplicable layer to the case. While speculation suggested they might protect against radiation or blinding light, their exact purpose remains unknown. The investigation uncovered a perplexing timeline. Both men had spent large sums of money, yet only a small amount was found on their bodies, raising questions about a possible robbery or foul play. Witnesses reported seeing them ascend the hill with others, but these individuals were never identified. A note suggested a deliberate plan involving ingesting capsules and waiting for a signal. However, the capsules were missing, and the delayed autopsies left the bodies too decomposed for toxicology tests, leaving potential causes like poisoning or drug overdose unverified. Speculation surrounding their deaths soon spread. Theories ranged from a robbery gone wrong to an elaborate suicide pact. Some believed the men were victims of foul play, noting the missing money and the possibility of an accomplice. Others suggested that the lead masks and instructions pointed to a ceremonial or spiritual purpose. Both men were reportedly involved in scientific spiritualism, blending science with mystical beliefs. In their homes, police found materials related to spiritualism, UFOs, and extraterrestrial contact. A friend of the men claimed they were attempting to communicate with alien beings or higher intelligence through rituals involving psychotropic substances. The lead masks were supposedly meant to shield their eyes from blinding light during the encounter. Further complicating the case were reports from locals of strange lights in the sky over Vintem Hill on August 17th. A respected resident, Gracinda Barbosa, described seeing a glowing, multicolored object hovering over the area. This sparked theories of UFO involvement and extraterrestrial experiments. French UFO researcher Jacques Vallée later visited the site, adding weight to the alien encounter hypothesis. However, it is important to remember that delays and negligence marred the official investigation. The autopsies were conducted too late to yield conclusive results, and police failed to identify any suspects or corroborate the spiritualist theories. The case was closed after 3 years, leaving its central questions unanswered. As such, the mystery endures. On a warm March morning in 1977, Charles Chuck Morgan, a 39-year-old escrow agent from Tucson, Arizona, left home to take his daughters to school. It was a routine day for the devoted family man, whose quiet life concealed a connection to dangerous forces in his state. Chuck never returned home that day, but then, 3 days later he did, only to disappear again in June of that year. In the early hours of March 25th, Ruth Morgan was startled awake by her dog barking. When she opened the front door, she found Chuck standing there, visibly shaken. His wrists and ankles were bound with plastic handcuffs, and he was missing a shoe. Chuck could not speak and communicated by writing. He claimed that his throat had been painted with a hallucinogenic drug that could kill him or destroy his nervous system if ingested. He begged Ruth not to contact the authorities, warning that doing so would endanger their family. Over the next week, Ruth nursed him back to health, feeding him with an eyedropper until he regained strength. During this time, Chuck revealed a startling claim. He had been working as an undercover agent for the US Treasury, tasked with combating organized crime. He alleged that his captors had taken his Treasury identification and hinted at the dangerous knowledge he possessed. The revelation cast a shadow over Chuck's life, introducing an air of paranoia that would dominate his final months. Chuck's work as an escrow agent placed him near the heart of narcotics trafficking and financial schemes. He handled large sums of money, including gold and platinum transactions, which authorities later suggested were fronts for laundering schemes. Chuck began wearing a bulletproof vest daily, carried a firearm, and refused to let anyone but himself transport his daughters to and from school. His caution, however, was not enough to protect him. On June 7, 1977, 2 months after his initial disappearance, Chuck vanished again. This time, he did not return on his own. 9 days later, Ruth received a cryptic phone call from a woman identifying herself only as Green Eyes. The caller reassured her that Chuck was alive and quoted a passage from the Bible, Ecclesiastes 12:1-8, which speaks of the fragility of life and the return of the spirit to God. 2 days later, Chuck's body was discovered in the desert, 40 miles west of Tucson. He was lying near his car, dressed in his bulletproof vest. He had been shot once in the back of the head with his own .357 Magnum revolver, which was found beside him without any fingerprints. Inside his car, investigators discovered handwritten directions to the location where his body was found. The strangest clue, however, was a $2 bill clipped to his underwear. It bore 7 Spanish names, references to the same Bible passage cited by Green Eyes, and a map pointing to smuggling routes near the Mexican border. A tooth wrapped in a white handkerchief was found in the car's back seat, alongside sunglasses that did not belong to him. The circumstances of Chuck's death raised more questions than answers. Despite the unusual evidence, authorities ruled Chuck had taken his own life. citing gunshot residue on his hand and the fact that the fatal shot came from his weapon. Ruth, however, rejected this conclusion. Journalist Don Devereaux, who later investigated the case, was equally skeptical, noting the improbability of Chuck shooting himself in the back of the head while wearing a bulletproof vest. Theories about Chuck's death abound. One suggested organized crime members ended their lives. Another theory posited that Chuck was killed to silence him, as he allegedly kept duplicate records of illicit transactions. Some speculated that the mysterious Green Eyes was connected to these events, as she later claimed Chuck had met her at a motel days before his death to show her a briefcase containing money intended to buy off a mob contract on his life. Shortly after his car was impounded, it was broken into and his office was ransacked. Weeks later, two men claiming to be FBI agents arrived at Ruth's home, ransacking it without explanation. The FBI, however, denied any knowledge of Chuck despite clear indications they had been involved in the case. Chuck's death remains one of Arizona's most enigmatic unsolved cases.